Hello and welcome to today's webinar. I'm your host, Richard Astor. I'm an associate with Onefish, and the title for today is How to Empower Teams Without the Wheels Coming Off. And welcome, Carrie Bedingfield.
Hello.
Welcome. So let's start with empower, that word, how to empower teams. So yeah, why start there? What's so important about this word empower? And what do you mean by it?
Yeah, so empower is one of those words that I sort of feel sick of hearing myself say. And it's a word that's become so overused that it's almost been stripped of all meaning. And yet, when we titled this webinar, I really struggled to find another word. The only other related word I could think of was self-organising. And I know when I talk to organisations about self-organising, sometimes they back out of the door quite quickly. So we stuck with empower, but it's a fascinating word because it immediately speaks to the fact that there is a power structure. And I know you have a question mark around, well, hang on a minute, how do we get to choose who is in charge of empowering? So who gets to give away the power? So there's an interesting dynamic there, first of all. And I guess there's a traditional assumption about how organisations work, that some people have power and some people don't, and that we want to perhaps share that power more, and therefore one party is going to be giving power to another person. But I find it fascinating that is an implicit assumption such that we don't even really register it in our head, based on this kind of idea of command and control hierarchical structures as the way to organise work. Right.
And then the other part of this without the wheels coming off. So it's baked into that some fear that if we empower people, bad things are going to happen.
Yeah. So I think there are lots of reasons why, even though empowerment is something pretty much every organisation wants to do, it'll be somewhere in their people strategy somewhere. The opposite of it is not really a viable strategy. So it's very unusual, I think. I can't think of any organisation who would specifically aim to disempower their people. But even though it's something we're all driving towards, the reality of doing it is anxiety producing for lots of people, probably on a couple of levels. One is the fear that bad things will happen. So when I stop being in control and somebody else starts to take on some of that control, that things will happen that I don't want to happen, or perhaps things that I don't expect to happen. But secondly, that my very identity will be questioned. So when I ran a session a couple of years ago for a very forward-thinking, open, but nevertheless large, ultimately traditional organisation, about how to run better project team meetings, or what some of the ways they might consider changing some of their project team meetings in order to empower people. One project manager said, I think what probably everybody else was thinking, which was, well, hang on a minute, if I'm not deciding exactly what the agenda is and how we tackle it in that meeting, what's my job? So what does a project manager do if not manage the project and manage everything that goes on? So I think it calls into question everything we believe about the role of a manager in an organisation.
Right. Okay. So it may cause us to think about the role of the manager, but where do we start? Let's just say that empowering teams is a good thing, and let's just say that we can do it in a way that means that the wheels don't come off. Then what is it? Where does the manager need to come from in order to manage?
Yeah. So I think, so whatever the philosophical nuances are about how we should think about teams, power managers, leaders, etc. The reality is that most managers, the place they're coming from right now is, I've got too much work, too much responsibility, I am struggling to keep my head above water. I'm leading a group of people who are following more than they're co-leading with me, or there's that feeling that if only people would take a bit more initiative, take more responsibility, do more step up. I often hear that word, I want people to kind of step up.
Yeah.
That my life would be better. And so there's a whole, so not empowering people is usually costing managers quite a lot. Not always, but usually. Empowering people costs them something different. And my instinct is that usually the cost of feeling too busy is actually not as great as that better serves us than the cost of feeling out of control, exposed, and so on. And from my personal point of view, I can hugely relate to that. I started Onefish Fish when I was 25. The team grew really fast. It was pre-recession. I remember somebody said to me in 2006, when we'd been going about 18 months, he said, "Oh, Carrie, there's something coming over the horizon and it's bad." And I was like, what could that be? Everything's great. So the business grew, the team members grew. I was pretty young. I was high energy, high control, and the greatest pain of that time was not the volume of work. I was happy to work 16 hours a day, work through the weekend, etc. The pain was having my name over the door, my name over the restaurant, but feeling like we were doing work. Some of our work wasn't good enough or was being criticised, and I was powerless to stop it. People were saying things to clients, and I think, oh, I can't believe you said that. Also, amongst lots of great work, I didn't have the skills and the tools to develop people to do the quality of work I needed them to do. But the pain of the exposure that bad things were happening within my team that I couldn't, and the instinct then is to just do more and more yourself. You take things back. Yeah. So I think at some point, some people do this naturally anyway. Not everybody is high energy, high control, high whatever. Some people are excellent at naturally bringing teams along with them, and I'm really deeply envious of those people. I'm not one of them, but at some point, and I think for me, it was the realization that this is unsustainable for me as a human being. The emotional cost of this is too great, and surely it's possible to do it differently, because people all over the world seem to lead high performing teams who are happy and empowered and so on. And the feeling that I'm willing to risk failure to try and make this, to do it differently. So I'm willing for it not to work. And it's almost like, when you've got your hand in the jar and you want to take the penny out or the sweet out, and you can't get your hand out. And it's only when you let go of the sweets that you can actually pull your hand out. So only when I was truly willing to risk my own personal view of failure was I able to accept the possible negative consequences of bad things happening.
Right. So for a lot of people, this shift towards empowering team requires something of themselves. It requires a letting go.
Definitely. And I think I imagine that listening to this will be some people who are thinking about how they might go about empowering their own team, and some people who are in an organisation or outside of an organisation helping people to empower their teams, or creating a culture in which teams are more empowered. And I think if you're the latter, if you don't truly recognise the degree of personal turmoil, the risk to status of the people you are asking to give away some control, then anything you do is unlikely to be successful. I also think that lots of people are willing to take a couple of steps in the right direction. So it's a bit like that thing where you try and get you're at the beach, you're on Brancaster Beach, it's maybe third weekend in September, It's a bit chilly, sunny. You think it's probably the last swim of the season. No one else is really swimming. Can you tell this is possibly a recent experience? You know, you take.
Where did you say Brancaster?
Yeah. So on the North
That's
in the UK.
In England.
In England. I mean, essentially.
International. Yes.
Yeah, in the North.
So September.
Yeah.
So that's, well, anywhere in England is going to be kind of cold. But
it could be August.
In September, it's definitely going to be.
Yeah, and you put your bikini on, you kind of step towards the water, you take a few steps in, and at that point, that's the worst bit where you think this is a really bad idea. Why am I doing this? It's way too cold. It's way too cold. You might even go a few steps further, go up to your, partway up your legs, and then it all seems like a terrible idea. And at that point, you just want to retreat backwards. So sometimes.
And have a cup of tea.
Exactly. Yeah. And that the tolerance of those early wobbles is painful. It's painful. Same when you're trying to learn to ride a bike or ride a bike with no hands. Tolerating those first early wobbles as the bike gets going with your hands off is uncomfortable, it's painful, and it's easy to kind of retreat back from that. And that's why I think managers maybe need some practical tools or things or techniques or ways to feel a bit safe in that transition, because I think for most people if it's not your natural instinct, it's too big a leap, and it's too hard to tolerate the discomfort of some bad things happening.
Okay. And so do you have tools from your own experience, because you said you've made to some degree a shift from being somebody who was less empowering to somebody who's more empowering? What techniques or tools have you found that have been useful?
So I think the thing that really helps me, and if I were to work with people or coach people, this is absolutely where we would start, is firstly a kind of examination of the personal cost of one way versus the other way. So the kind of acknowledgement that it's painful to let go of control for some people, but it's painful to hang on to control, and that an investment in empowering a team, it's a long game that we're playing here, and that ultimately that investment pays off. So if you have a kind of clear picture in your head of where you're trying to get to, I find it easier to tolerate the bumps along the way. And then secondly is the awareness that it can take a lot longer than you think at the start. I think it's a bit like a hockey stick curve, that you can kind of go down a bit at first and progress, and it can all seem quite fruitless. But when it picks up speed, when people start to get it, including you, when the team start to get it, you can really accelerate very quickly. And it's a very joyful, energizing, very deeply satisfying, rewarding place to be. And that's when you get the personal payback of less mental frustration and stress, a sense of shared responsibility, which as a human is a wonderful, wonderful thing to be able to kind of share responsibility with people. So I think I start with a bit of a mindset, like get my head straight, a bit like starting a diet, get your head straight. Not that I advocate dieting.
Right. But your particular, what you focused on there in terms of getting head straight was this examination of the relative costs, right? There's a cost of letting go.
Yeah.
But there's
a cost of holding on.
And there's a cost of holding on.
Yeah.
So it's doing that sort of balance sheet exercise mentally to begin with. So to get, that's what you mean by getting your head straight, is an honest appraisal of that.
Exactly. Yeah.
And then having the vision of this could be bumpy.
Yeah.
So, I suppose that's the big why. It's almost become a cliche now, but is that right?
That's right. And then under pressure, I find I can't remember that vision. so once I'm under pressure, somebody's done something I don't want, or there's a deadline or a problem with a client or a something. Once I've got a bit scared, then I forget the vision. So I give myself reminders of that. So one of the things I did for a couple of years is at the top of my to-do list, which is a document I find is open quite a lot, is I'd put in really large font the where I wanted to be coming from. So I had a personal sort of mission for a couple of years. Actually, I try and have a different one each year, and that year, and I kept it for a second year, it was sow and encourage, not sewing like needlework, but sowing seeds and encouraging. And by reminding myself of that under pressure, when my kind of amygdala's going nuts, that would help me remember it. Sometimes I put it in my diary as the kind of as a bing bong every day. I find those become like wallpaper pretty soon, and you just turn them off. And I'd also have ways to express my intention to other people as a verbal commitment. So not as something I didn't believe and was saying to other people in the hope that I would later believe it, but if I did believe it, then say it. So one of the things I do say, I think, to people, colleagues at Onefish Webinar, and I absolutely mean it, is, it is encouraging people to ask me for support and help, to think aloud with me, for me to play any role that helps them do their job better, that they've chosen for me, and to consider that, I would say to them, that is my job. That's not do you a favour. I'm not, you're not kind of, oh, thanks, Carrie, for helping, and sorry to disturb you, and, I'll just take up a little bit of your time. That is my job, is to help you. And as soon as I say that out loud, I remember that in my head as well. I'm trying to kind of reinforce that belief that is my job, is to support people, not to kind of control people.
Okay.
Interesting that I have to remind myself of that.
Right. So there's something about the being, the who am I, this sower of seeds and encouragement, and then there's the doing, which is reminding of yourself about what this new job looks like.
Yes.
As a manager.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I think that, and the first time I did that, again, this is something that I did, and we work with clients on, is I think sometimes it's easy to confuse empowering people with taking all the structure away. And a bit like, as you'll know, my philosophy for meetings is, in order to encourage participation, that doesn't mean removing the structure. It means having a structure that serves participation. So when I am working with a team to encourage more shared responsibility, more self-organising, more team members doing more of the stuff that they think they should be doing, then I'd encourage them to put some structures in place that they think really help them. And one is guardrails. So when I first handed over Onefish to Liz Hayward, who was its managing director for 5 years, one of the things we did is we got a great big piece of paper and we mapped out who gets to make what decision. So what decisions do we make together? What decisions are mine to make as the shareholder, or as the ultimate backstop of the business? What decisions are hers to make? And we kind of revisited that quite a lot. We were always adding to it and saying, well, who makes that decision now? Or do we still want to be involved in that? No, that's fine. And we also had a few hard stops. So, for example, there was certain criteria, like if we lost, or if there was a problem with a major client, that was something we definitely needed to talk about the same day. If it was a serious problem with a major client, if there was an issue, if there was a cash flow issue of a certain quantity, well, that would trigger a kind of same day, conversation within 24 hours. So it was and actually we never needed to do that. We never had a cash flow issue that required that. We never had a serious issue with a client, but that gave me a sense of comfort that the wheels wouldn't come off completely. They might wobble a little bit, but that they could never come off. There was a safety rail. They could never come off completely without my at least having some knowledge and visibility of it.
Okay.
And I guess the other very simple structure that I think helps is to provide loads of visibility. So the manager doesn't provide visibility. The manager creates a structure in which the team provide visibility to each other. So my belief is the group is smart. Given the facts, the group makes good decisions. Without the facts, or often the facts are unidirectionally fed to the manager. The manager's the only person with visibility of each individual team member's facts, but equally they're only in possession of the filtered facts, so they also don't have a complete picture. If the team can share less filtered, less censored facts and feelings with each other, as a general rule, work out loud, make data available, quite quickly people start to pick up on that and start to call things out and say, oh, maybe that means we should do that differently, or does anybody else think this is a problem, etc.
That's interesting you said feelings there, because often when we think about visibility in teams, certainly when I think about visibility in teams, we think about some of the lean and the agile techniques, which is all about putting the work items on the wall, but we talk less about being transparent with our feelings. So why include that?
Yeah, so our feelings are a fantastic guide to sometimes facts that we're not yet aware of. They are a guide to problems coming down the track. They're a guide to things that aren't as good as they should be. That's assuming they're negative feelings. They might be a guide to things we should be playing up and doing more of, where we feel like, oh, this is a great feeling today when, we nailed it, or I have a feeling sometimes, and this is my kind of gauge of how my general work well-being is. Sometimes I sit there at the start of the day and think, I have this great wave of well-being inside me, and I feel like I've got interesting work to do with interesting people that I'm capable of doing, that stretches me a bit, and I've got enough time to do it. And that is the most joyful work type feeling. And so sometimes there are lots of positive feelings that we can start to pick up on. And feelings also tell us where we've misread meaning. So sometimes different people will look at the same facts and infer different stories and meaning. Often those stories and meaning are not correct, but by surfacing the feeling, we get to explore the story and more deeply and richly understand the work we're trying to do and how we might do it successfully, better, etc.
Right. So it helps us make sense of different interpretations.
Yeah. So
what people are making of the facts.
That's right. So one of the things, when you make everything more visible, make more facts more visible earlier to more people, then the issue there is that we may have come from a whole career to date of trying to make negative facts, so things not completed, bugs, Eventbrite tickets not sold, clients lost, we've tried, or progress not made. Of trying to sort of sanitize those or play up what's good and not look at what's bad. We're trying to sort of spin our story all the time, because that's part of staying safe in an organization and maintaining identity. And to a certain extent, that's been a bit hijacked, I think, by the positivity, the kind of relentlessly positive, appreciative inquiry movement. I'm all for playing to our strengths. I'm all for a kind of hugely positive approach to business, but not if that means that we feel unable to share facts that we think, even if they're not negative, that other people might perceive as negative. So place a negative in the backdrop of all of that. Make a negative fact visible, or a fact visible, that other people might interpret as a lack of progress or a failure. And our worry is that we will be judged for that. So a big part of empowering teams is creating this environment of psychological safety. Another term I'm almost tired of hearing myself say, and if you go to an Agile conference now, I kind of think they all seem, the theme of all of them seems to be psychological safety. At one of them recently, I think possibly 40% of the talks essentially came down to psychological safety. Such is our focus on it. And far from being that meaning that we need our teams for everybody to feel happy and positively regarded all the time, or for all their work to be positively regarded, we need them to feel held in unconditional positive regard, and such that they can separate themselves out from any critique of the work that's being done. So as a manager, I think you set in the early days, as you're shifting across from a more of a high control model to a shared control model or shared responsibility model, how you treat facts sets the tone for how the group treat them. If you judge other people's facts as, well, it's not great that we've had a lack of progress, but hopefully you can do it better next week, not ideal. But equally, if the whole thing is, oh, it's totally fine to fail, and and kind of rescue, don't worry, I'll come and help with that. So that's the sort of rescuer part of the drama triangle. That doesn't really help either. Actually, because that the implication is that's a negative fact, but don't worry, I'll make sure you're okay. We'll make sure that fact gets sorted out and that you're okay. And I think all of that implies that lack of progress or a problem is bad for people. And I think if we can separate those things out, and the master of doing this is the CEO of Unboxed, Richard Stobart. He is the uber master of exploring facts with no judgment about a person, or whether they're right or wrong, whether that was the right thing or the wrong thing to have happened, or how they might have emerged, but just trying to make sense of what to do next. Right.
It's this dispassionate accounting of what happened.
Dispassionate accounting. Yeah. And you and I have talked about this before, and kind of detach. Is it even human to kind of detach entirely from facts? And to a certain extent, it isn't. It's a lifetime's work to be able to look at facts without encircling them with pleasure or anxiety related to our own identity. Who doesn't, have some kind of brainstorming session? Who doesn't feel inwardly pleased when the group says, I think we should go with that, or I think that's a really insightful point? Who doesn't kind of feel taller and better about themselves? And equally, who doesn't feel disappointed when something they've done or said doesn't find favour with the group? But I think if we can work on, and this is where some of the structures help, if we can make it easy to share, make facts visible, such that they can be discussed, and model the process of not taking things personally, then that's really, really powerful to do. Yeah.
Right. And is there anything you have in terms of advice or suggestions of being able to model that as an individual, to be able to create that separation between facts and feelings while still exploring feelings? Yeah.
So I think it's worth examining your own language, facial expressions, etc., and thinking how, and maybe getting some insight from other people about how you show up. So we all have an impact on our teams and our colleagues that we know about, and we have a shadow that we possibly don't know about.
I'm just imagining you going into a meeting holding a sort of face mirror up and
yeah. It's not really what I take photos of you
as you share the sales results.
Yeah, and I think why not make some of that explicit? So to say, going forward, one of the things we're holding a value for is sharing things more openly and not prejudging them. And certainly not judging that a lack of progress or etc. it reflects poorly on an individual. So once you've articulated that out loud, and the prime directive in an agile retrospective is a great way to do that. So the prime directive sets the tone for a particular meeting in agile where the team stop doing the work for an hour or however long and look and reflect on the work and see if they can improve the work. And the statement, the banner statement under which that whole conversation is held, is that that we're all assuming that everybody did the best they could with the resources they had, the knowledge they had at the time, how they saw the situation, what was available, and that all we're doing now is searching for the truth and how we might make things better in the future. So trite as it might sound, making those statements obvious and visible puts that in the middle of the room, and then anybody can point at that, anybody can pick up on that language. So you might then find other people say, in the spirit of simply trying to look at what we could do better, I wonder whether ... and respond to one of those facts using that, by signposting that in the spirit of this thing that we've agreed we're going to do, could we look at improving this? So that's one way to do it. I think the other way is to say, as control goes down, support needs to go up. So in the same way that you might feel uncomfortable giving away some control, some people might feel uncomfortable taking it up, and feel that they are now the kind of thing that they would have been given a lot of direction on before, they're now having to kind of discuss with themselves in their own head and create a plan for, take responsibility for. That's quite exposing. So one of the things I would always work with teams to do is to create a similar to their visibility structure, create a support structure, but one that's driven by each individual. So that in the spirit of, it is my job to support you. Here are the ways you can ask for support. So anyone who works with me will know that I have a Calendly account in which links to my diary, and in which anybody at any time can book a 25-minute call to talk something through. And when they book it, it books it straight into my diary. They pick a time that works for them, and they're asked to state what they want to get out of it, what role they want me to play. Do they just want me to listen while they talk out loud? Do they want me to give them some advice, or do they want me to coach them? So they choose how the way in which they want me to interact. And then finally, they can let me know if there's something they want me to read or kind of come ready to have done beforehand. So it becomes a really efficient use of time. And actually I can eat quite a lot of those in a day. I can eat 4 or 5 of those. What I can't eat is a call I'm not expecting, where it takes me 10 minutes to even work out what we're talking about and what I need to do. I can't do that. my brain doesn't work like that. Although I'm happy to do some of those. But I've created a structure that allows people to tap into me, when hopefully in a way that works for them. Now, other people will have better ways that work better for them, but the implication is, and I would normally say this to people, you can book as many of those as you want. If we are spending 9 to 5 all day, every day, this becomes our full-time job, is talking on the phone, well, then we probably need to look at it. But consider that an unlimited resource. And I've never, ever had to talk to anybody about the number of times they might use that resource. Okay.
So to recap, then the 2 things you mentioned was putting the facts in the middle of the room, I think is the expression, and then allowing the team or those that you're managing to build the interpretation. And also, as you reduce control, you need to be there to provide support.
Yeah,
that makes sense. It reminds me of something I read, a book recently called The 12 Steps to Flow by Finn Goulding and Hayden Shaughnessy. And Hayden, I think, wrote this part of it. He said that when you get into flow, and he's talking about something similar. So when you reduce control and you allow teams to take more control, they have to find on the individual, the onus then on the individual is to create their own boundaries.
Yes, yes.
And they're used to having their boundaries set by the manager, the organization.
Yes.
And when you move into this way of working, something that becomes incumbent on the individual is to actually create their own boundaries. And that, I thought that was quite a powerful insight. And it links to what you're saying there, is that some people will need support to do that.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, indeed. And I think some teams do this and some teams don't, but I think a period of contracting together can really help. So Mike Pegg, who's now, I think, probably in his 80s, he's one of the sort of grandfathers of the strengths movement, fascinating man who worked with young offenders in the 70s and went on to was absolutely prolific in the content he created and shared around strength. I think he's written something like 25 books, of which perhaps some of them are behind me here. And he made all his life's work open source about 7 or 8 years ago. And I regularly go to his site, which I think is the strengths.org.info, something like that. Strengths Organisation. If you go there, you can find things there. And he would say he has lots of ways in which you can help a team contract together. And he has a process called Super Teams, which you can go onto his website and download. And it's something I kind of borrow from or create things that are inspired by that regularly. And nothing that he does is rocket science. You wouldn't look at any of that and think, that's a question I would never have thought to ask a team. But the way that he structures it and the sort of the consistency and the thoroughness with which he does it allows the team to get very clear. So a team would establish, so I quite like the term reset. We sometimes do team resets where the team might be performing quite well. It just wants to shift direction, tangibly shift direction. And it might go back over, what is this team for? What is this team? What can this team be world class at doing? What are our great strengths? What are our individual strengths? What is this team running towards? Whether you call it a goal or a KPI or just a direction, what are we running towards? And is there what's the degree of overlap between what individuals in the group are running towards personally and the group's goal? Are they, how aligned or not are they? How lined up are they? Not necessarily seeking to line them all up perfectly, but just to expose the truth so that that's more obvious. And as you work through the process, it encourages you to just together create some rules for working together, create and as the manager, because the risk is, well, how do you empower a team without kind of telling them the new way they're going to be empowered? How can you empower the way in which you empower them itself, empower them? And it allows the manager to ask them probing questions like, well, how do we do this as a team? And how would we approach that? And what would happen if this happened? How would we make sure that this bad thing didn't happen? Or and so on. And for the team to kind of answer that together and to create a document that they co-created, which can then go on the wall, such that we agreed these things together and we've now got something to refer back to.
Okay. And that could be a way, certainly in the early stages of a transition like this, and you're suggesting.
Yeah. And I think it's all about the level of maturity of the team. So I don't mean maturity as in, did they tell boob jokes or etc. But I mean the degree to how defended they are. So a team that's operated in a highly controlled environment, perhaps where any mistakes or perceived lack of progress has had some consequences, reputationally, promotion-wise, where it hasn't felt very psychologically safe. And sometimes a controlling manager, if you've had a controlling manager for some time, that can be a pretty painful experience. And you're pretty wary of, as soon as your controlling manager says, hey, everybody, today, we're going to really start to kind of empower us. Yeah, let loose. And I found at Onefish, Twofish, having been really controlling for a long time, it took quite some time for people to warm up to my new to my new approach, and they needed multiple experiences of me not being controlling or reacting in a different way to certain situations to feel really confident that yes, this was going to stand the test of time, and I wasn't going to be it wasn't like, oh, on good days we're fine, but then, you know, if push comes to shove, actually she reverts back to being controlling pretty quickly. So I think that could take some time.
Yeah, it just reminds me of those videos if you see sort of chickens that are let out of their battery cages, and they sort of very tentatively checking out the coop, and they're not quite sure where to go. Not that I'm comparing you to sort of battery farmer.
In many ways I am, yes. Yeah.
Right. So the other term that we talked about before we came on here was, and I think it links pretty much to what you've talked about, but there may be maybe some value in looking at it, is adult to adult. So that's an idea that's central to your philosophy, I suppose.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So I ran Onefish Webinar ran a sort of outbound campaign about 5 years ago, where we shared I think we probably shared a slide share or something like that had some kind of ideas in it, and invited people who are interested to make contact and book a conversation with us. So kind of standard sales approach. And we did it on something like the 16th of December, 18th of December. You know, it was kind of it's probably not going to do any good before Christmas, but let's wing it out anyway. And that filled my diary for the whole of January. And as I went to all these different meetings, many of which went on to become clients and which we still work with today, and certainly as people move from organisation to organisation, they remain our sort of, we remain their partners. And everywhere I went, they'd obviously, this is like 2013, so they printed it all out. They printed the thing out, and they'd have circled the word adult to adult in it and said, this is what we need. Our organisation, oh, it's so parent-child. And that seemed to be the kind of phrase that really resonated with people. So there are two levels. One is probably more than two levels, but for today, there's the level of the organisation and the employees, the colleagues. Does the organisation take a kind of parent style or an adult style, and do the employees take an adult style, or are they operating, do they come from a place of child sometimes? But also that dynamic gets mirrored often with managers as well. So if anybody isn't familiar with adult to adult parent child, if it isn't immediately obvious, it comes from Eric Berne's transactional analysis. It was used in family therapy and couples therapy, often in family therapy, and it did literally refer to that dynamic where if one person kind of acts in parent, i.e. controlling, telling, etc., they are to a certain extent inviting a response from the other side in child. And child could be the child that wants to please everybody and adapts their behaviour in order to please the parent, or it could be that the child rebels and says, well, if you're telling me that, I'm not doing that, I'll do the opposite, or that they kind of switch off completely and they opt out. And you see that over and over again in teams. And I spend a lot of time in child, I think, and often these days, actually, I think I sort of switch off from things. Sometimes I sit in meetings and think, oh, and just like, well, you can just all carry on, and I'm just mentally checking out. But that is a childlike response. It's a childlike response. But the thing about parent-child as a dynamic and adult to adult is it is a reciprocal role. So one doesn't exist in isolation. It is offer and acceptance. It's a hand extended to the other person inviting a dance, and the other person chooses to accept that dance. So if you are offered parent, it's difficult to respond in adult. It's much easier to respond in child. If you get a response in child, well, you are invited to respond back in parent. So it's quite a powerful psychodynamic relationship, which can require some exiting if you've had that going on for quite a long time. So I see lots of situations with managers who really, really want to encourage their team to take more responsibility, and they want to move to a sort of more self-organising model. It might be forced on them because we've worked with an organisation recently where they are moving offices. So they're moving from a traditional environment in which everybody had a desk with their name on it to an office where there aren't enough desks for everybody. The space is used really differently. You won't have your own desk, and you'll probably spend a lot of time working at home. So even if you wanted to stay as a nice controlling manager, or a highly effective high control manager, your team are going to be working. You're not going to be able to see your team all week. You're going to have to move to a more high trust model, even if there aren't any other reasons, positive reasons to do that. So, and if you've had this long-term parent-child type dynamic, it's very difficult to imagine the other party, the other end of the relationship, not acting in child, because that's all you've seen them do. And yet somewhere in your brain, I used to think about some people I worked with, I bet if this is an interesting concept, but if I went under a bus, or perhaps something a bit less brutal and a bit more like
under a scooter,
or a sort of like a skateboard or something, that meant I had 3 weeks in hospital where I couldn't do anything at all, or 3 weeks at home or whatever, I don't think that person or that team would run around, eating sweets all day and calling clients and saying the F word, and they'd take responsibility. They'd have to, and they'd probably be really, really, really good at it. So it's obvious that I'm part of it, that we're absolutely part of colluding to continue that, but it's not always easy to see a way out, and that's where some of these interventions can help, or not interventions, another word I'm tired of hearing myself say, but doing things a bit more deliberately and consciously and some experiments, trying some things out can really help.
Right, but it sounds also about bringing consciousness to this, because you could try experiments, and you could try more visibility, and you could try a bunch of techniques, but these same parent-child dynamics may emerge just in new forms. Because as you say, they're so compelling, aren't they? And we get so addicted to the drama and
I love the drama,
unresolved stuff from our childhood, in the workplace.
And a bit like the change curve, whether or not you believe that the kind of change curve or the different rooms of change are real or not, it's not realistic to think that you can do such a fantastic job of communicating and allowing people to experience change positively, that they're not going to go through a few phases. That it's unrealistic to think that they're going to go from change being somehow arriving in their world, and then you've done it so brilliantly that they immediately adopt it and off they go. Or they immediately respond positively and off they go. They might, but most people will go through a few different phases and stages. And I think it's exactly the same in this empowerment process. And they might go from adaptive child, so please everybody child, to rebellious child, which is like, I'm not doing it. You can't make me, my job is I've seen this recently actually in an organisation with lots of people who work outside. They're not at computers, they're not knowledge workers, they're working on fairly manual logistical processes. They don't want anyone telling them what to do, but they don't really want to take much more responsibility either yet. And that's that kind of, screw you, my job is to come in and pick up my worksheet and be told what to do. Don't try and make me do something else for no extra pay. And that doesn't mean they're rejecting it forever, but they're trying out rejecting it, and then they might move through that process. They might not, but most people they won't stay in that state forever. Right.
Yeah, it'll take a while. Okay. I was just thinking of a term for this, persexic. So parent-child exit, but it doesn't work.
Oh, parentexit. Yeah.
Movement.
Child exit. Yeah, I love it.
Yeah.
Yeah, oh no, now it's an IP issue.
Yeah,
Yours or
exactly.
mine?
Who owns it?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So it feels like we've had a really good tour around some of these ideas about how we move to more empowered environments, and we've talked a bit about how to maintain some, or for the wheels not to come off, to maintain some guardrails and some boundaries as part of this process. It reminds me a bit. I've read something that agile without accountability is just a holiday, or you could say the same thing. Self-organization without accountability is just a vacation, something like that. So, is there any?
Yeah.
Sorry.
Well, a holiday is great. Just time for a holiday and a time for responsibility. Yeah.
Right. And is there anything you've not touched on during the course of the conversation that you think is worth sharing on this topic?
I think two really small things, of which one has momentarily escaped me, but maybe it will return, maybe it won't. So one is sometimes very small things send very big signals. And I think, my love for meetings and my desire to improve everybody's meetings, partly because I think they are a proxy and an interpreter of culture. They tell us what the culture is. So in a meeting, one thing I've noticed is if the leader of the meeting, the manager of the team, what they do with their eye contact, their gaze, their attention, tells everybody where the power dynamic is. So if we're feeding back in a group and doing some kind of turn taking, and every time one person finishes, the team leader's like, okay, thank you, that's great, and now you, and they are taking the power back to them, or taking the responsibility for the direction back, and then passing it on to the next person. Everybody will follow that. So the person giving their contribution will give it directly to the leader of the meeting, and then they'll look for their cue that, am I done? Is that enough? And then the next person, they're not looking at the person who's just spoken that they're following, they're looking at the team leader to see, are you ready for me to go yet? So it's like, who's holding the ball? Where does the ball get passed back to? And you're constantly, if you do that, you're constantly, despite the fact you want to be really encouraging and keep things moving, you are essentially maintaining and emphasizing the original power dynamic, and you may not want that. And the implication is you share data, you all individuals share data back to me. I handle that, the complexity of that, the interrelationships between that data, process it, and I send it back to you, which is probably not what you want. So a simple way to change that is to use your gaze differently, and to kind of shut up and just let people talk to each other. So maintain eye contact with the group as a whole, or sometimes if I'm looking at the person who's speaking, I might then be kind of trying to direct my gaze back at the other people as well, to reflect. I'm trying to reflect the fact that we're all talking to each other, you're not talking to me. And equally, when it comes to the time to move from one person to the next, just putting your gaze in the center of the room, so having a neutral gaze, and then people are forced to look at each other, and that can be a bit uncomfortable. Loads of this is really clunky and awkward and uncomfortable, but it sends quite a powerful signal.
Right.
That's one thing. The other is, there's quite a question mark for me about how ruthlessly should you become a sort of functional team, where if you want people to take more responsibility, sometimes it helps for people to get much clearer about what they are fully responsible for and what somebody next to them is fully responsible for. And so Brian Robertson, in his book Holacracy, advocates absolutely crystal clear responsibility. And that to me can feel quite didactic, and the idea that it's everything's kind of every task or responsibility is mutually exclusive and collectively exhaustive, which sounds very neat, but it doesn't really encourage interdependence. That said, I think it is helpful to have a living document where responsibilities are clear, and of course, as you learn more about the work you're doing, new responsibilities emerge, or new things we hadn't thought was a thing to be responsible emerge. And a good question to ask for team members to ask of each other is, who's responsible for this? And then that gets added back onto the document or however you capture it. So you avoid the issue of things of duplication, or more often nobody does it because everybody thinks the other person is responsible for it. And you kind of have to find your way, what works for you as a team, and doesn't turn you into kind of a team of silos. Yeah.
Right.
Can I ask you a question?
Sure.
What would you add? So we have some philosophical. We have loads of crossover. We've got some philosophical differences. We've worked in different types of organisations. How would you enrich everything I've said with how you see the world?
Well, the thing I would emphasise is, and we did touch on it, but the self-management element of that. And when I talk about that, I mean us as individuals. So my experience of getting better at letting go, getting better at coaching other people has been my ongoing commitment to my own process of dealing with all of the quirks of my character that are sourced in my childhood, and where I experienced pain in my childhood that I'd not resolved, then gets played out in the workplace, in my relationships. Because, and this is, I believe, psychologically, I'm trying to recreate those difficulties of my childhood in order to resolve it in the present.
Yeah.
But I'm doing that unconsciously.
Yeah.
So I get addicted to the drama, because in some sense, it's a healthy impulse to resolve something, but because it's all unconscious, I'm not aware that what I'm trying to do is resolve some past, upset. And so my experience of going back and reliving and healing and grieving incidents from my past allows me to be more present and less addicted to drama around me. So, and I think we create these control structures and power structures as a way to compensate for or attempt to resolve past, let's say, power imbalances. So yeah, that would be the thing I would add. And it's not about the individual. It's me, it's I and the group. So not the only place to look, but it's a very important place to look, or at least it has been for me. Yeah. And perhaps it's important to the extent that one has had a difficult childhood. So, yeah.
Yes. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Are we done?
We're done. Before you close, can I just do one final thing, which is to say, Richard has the most fantastic podcast called Being Human. It's on iTunes. He explores some of the things we're talking about today. So many of the themes will crop up very richly with deep experts in that area. It's absolutely fascinating, and as a kind of complement to some of the things we're talking about, quite practically from a team and leadership point of view, it's a great place to go to fuel your knowledge and understanding. Now we're done.
Okay, so I was going to close out with the people who want to go with deeper at any of this stuff. You mentioned a few references. We talked about Byrne. Are there any that you'd like to highlight for people who want to go deeper?
So we talked about Eric Byrne and transactional analysis. We also talked about Mike Pegg and the Strengths Foundation. We'll put all the details of these things in the show notes. And if you wanted a conversation with me or anyone else from any of these webinars, you can use my Calendly 25-minute slots, which I'll also put in the show notes, to have a conversation where you can think aloud about something going on in your own team or organisation. And we are always happy to do that, and in fact delighted to hear, to be kind of trusted with some more specific issues, if that's helpful for anybody.
Awesome. All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks, Richard.
High five.
There it goes.
All right.